Good afternoon, you're watching AB Live, a brand new news-based chat show in which we discuss topics ranging from business, news, politics and so much more. On today's episode, we are going to draw similarities between the UAE and the UK's real estate market, and for that in the studios right now we have Harry Tregoning from Tregoning Properties. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Shruti.
Right, to begin with, tell us more about Tregoning Property and what you do.
So we're a UAE-based real estate company. We're very much involved in the residential side. We've been running here for about 5 years, and we are mainly doing rentals, but we do a few sales along the way as well, which is really exciting. We do occasional commercial projects as well, renting a few offices. But residential is very much our heartland. We've got a few brokers working in the office, and we are looking to open on the 1st of March in the UK, where we're looking to do two real functions. One is selling residential properties in East Anglia, and the other one is going to be helping manage properties in London for expats, so that I think lots of people have problems managing from afar. But what we want to be able to do is offer a service where you can come to an office here to discuss your grievances and your problems that you're having with your tenants, and that can immediately be transferred to our people in London, who can then go and sort out the concerns.
Right. So you will be opening a property or your office in London. That's quite brave of you.
Well, I think you've got to get on with it at some point, haven't you? And I think it's not that brave. The London market's always going pretty well, up or down, and there's a lot of sort of similarity in terms of the ownership here in Dubai and in London.
Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by the ownership similarities?
Well, the Arab world have last year invested over $1 billion dirhams in London just in commercial properties.
Oh wow.
And it was 2 billion the year before, so there's been a bit of a fall, but there's a huge amount. But also many expats have properties in London, and so there's a lot of interest, and with the sheer number of people from the UK, of course, in this country.
Of course. So what exactly would you say is the USP then? What is attracting all of these Arab people to the UK?
Well, I think the UK market's very much about the stability and the long-term game. You might not see a sudden rise, and you might not see anything sort of go whoosh quickly, but it's going to continue to just build on. It's astonishing if you look at the markets over 10 years, how much some of the properties have increased.
Right.
But you don't get the flashy returns. I think Property Finder recently did a sort of a bit of research, and the return on investment, it could be 6.5% to 7% here in Dubai in the UAE, and as low as 2.7% in London.
Oh right.
So the yields aren't quite so fancy.
So technically UAE is a more appealing market then when it comes to investments compared to London.
I think so. I think it's got additional political risk, but I'm not sure you could only say that about the UAE with Brexit. But I mean, the UAE market's pretty exciting in its own right. It's constantly evolving. You only just saw last week that RERA has now become part of the Dubai Land Department, which makes a lot of sense. And just the fact that we have RERA in Dubai is actually ahead of most other countries where there's very little legislation about people that work in the property market.
Right, so apart from obviously attracting Arab crowd to the UK and vice versa, what else would you say are the main or key similarities between the two markets' real estate?
Well, I think they're pretty different, and this market's pretty fast moving comparatively. Many parts of central London have been there for hundreds of years and haven't changed that much. I mean, there's definitely projects still going, which we'll probably come on to a little bit later, that sort of regenerating parts of London. But it's here, you only have to look out the window here and you can see cranes. So there's always new opportunities here.
But then that's one of the problems here, right? We talk about oversupply as one of the challenges here in the UAE, because exactly like you mentioned, you look out and there are cranes everywhere, there are buildings being built every single day, but are there occupants for all of these buildings?
Well, if you think there's 60,000 new units going up this year, being released onto the market this year. The population in this country is not dropping. It's increasing year on year still. So 60,000 units, 2 people in each, maybe 3. what's that, 180,000 more people. So there's a continuing people coming. I think the quality of the products, of the units, is now much more important because there is choice. Landlords need to make sure that they offer a much better offering.
Right.
And people require higher standards as a result.
Okay. And how about in the UK? How exactly is it there? So I've read reports where real estate agents aren't really able to sell property, and there aren't a lot of property on offer at this point. So it's sort of the other way around, the problem back in the UK.
It is, and to a certain extent that is caused by the political unrest that Brexit is there's causing. I mean, I think everyone from the UK is bored of Brexit, but it's been rumbling on now since the vote for 3 years and 3 months. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people are sitting on their hands because they don't know which way it's going to go. Overseas investors are still arriving and spending money, but the British, they're not putting on their properties. You know, they're waiting to see what the outcome might be. Equally, the pound is very weak, just on behalf of Brexit, and also they're very much looking towards if Brexit happens and the pound recovers, what's going to happen there? And so if they can get that certainty back, people will plan.
But that's going to be a while, right, until the certainty actually comes back?
Well, it could do, but there's also the political uncertainty that's involved. I mean, Boris Johnson, from having a majority of about 5 or 6 a couple of weeks ago, is down to negative equity in that respect. So he's trying to have a general election. Jeremy Corbyn's not brave enough to take him on. So there's still political uncertainty, and even after Brexit, there's bound to be an election within the first couple of months while people try and reorganise themselves.
Right. So what would you say would the best case scenario be then in this situation?
Well, for me, get on with it. Get it done. Don't give any more extensions. They've all been messing around for far too long.
Right.
Everyone's bored of the MPs playing their own games, and if they can get on with it, then we can all move forwards. Properties can come back on the market, and confidence can build. But a lot of people in the UK do play the long game, as we mentioned earlier. Right. And this is probably just a blip in a massive cycle.
Right. So now I'm just going to come back to the question I asked you earlier about you being brave. So we're seeing an economic trough here in the UAE, of course, with the oil prices. We know it's recovering, but it's slow. The recovery is quite slow. And then the uncertainty being the buzzword in the UK with regards to Brexit and everything. And you have decided to invest in these two markets. So just broadly speaking, would you say this is the right time to in fact invest in the real estate markets of these two regions?
I think it's a good time. I think there's nothing wrong with either market. This one's maturing all the time, but there's still opportunity here. The UK one's maturer. I also think, just for our business, we need to look to work in new boundaries, new areas, and obviously, being a Brit myself, going back to parts of the world we know well, we have an added advantage. I also like to think that you're still remembered from the area you lived in, which is of course where we will do our office, because obviously friends and relations are still there, so we have a network already to aim at. But if we leave it too much longer, that might not be there. Right.
So now, just speaking of the economic policies, we've seen a few new amendments made to the laws here in the region. So we saw the residency law, 10-year visas, the retirement visa, the 5-year retirement visa, and of course the Abu Dhabi freehold property law. So these are all done to sort of fuel the real estate economy, essentially. Have we started seeing an impact of that yet?
We definitely have seen an impact. We have sold a couple of apartments in JBR where the buyer insisted on it being $1 million dirhams, so he could get his 3-year visa. Oh. The seller might have negotiated below, but he didn't want that because he wanted to get his passport, his visa from residency here from buying. Wow. So that to me is a huge positive and shows that there is a bit of traction in that part of the market.
Right.
Especially if you come from a sort of weaker passport type area. So that's good. It's obviously good in Abu Dhabi that you can now buy your own freehold. As we've seen in Dubai, particularly sort of, I suppose in the villa areas, people are putting down real roots in Dubai, and far from just passing through. Now their families are here, they've bought villas, and they are the community.
All right, so would you say then villas and communities is what's working right now in the region, the types of property that is on demand?
No, because it depends also on the demographic of people coming. I think that in the past, it's been very much a family place, Dubai, and it's evolved now into more single workers coming in, sort of younger professionals, and you'll see a lot more of that. But of course, they require 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments, and the success of downtown continues to just it keeps being fueled by new people arriving, and subsequently they've put city walks arrived, and that's really busy.
Right.
There are a few 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments available, but 3 bedrooms are all occupied, and there's a constant demand, and new clean area, there's entertainment there with the new stadium, the Coca-Cola Stadium.
Of course.
And so there is demand from that as well. But the villa areas are obviously becoming more green and settled.
Yeah.
So if you drive around the Meadows or Arabian Ranches or Victory Heights, you feel that you are part of a much more settled community.
Agreed, yeah. So now how about in the UK? So over here you've given us a few examples, and of course there's Dubai South and all of these big properties coming in Meydan, etc. In the UK, so one of the projects that I have been reading about is the Battersea Power Station project. So that is one of those community, all-inclusive projects that's happening. But are there other examples that you can give?
Yes, there are. I mean, there's a company called Northacre, and this is backed by Abu Dhabi Finance.
Okay.
And they are doing a project called the Broadway, which is where New Scotland Yard used to be, and that's proving to be pretty popular for investors. Crossrail, this is a new rail line across London.
Okay, yeah.
Where their stations are, has seen enormous gains in value.
So, but are these properties being bought and occupied by the people within the EU and the UK, or from other expats?
The thing about London is it's a very international city. So there are people they're parts of sort of Belgravia, which are pretty quiet because so many of the properties are owned by overseas residents.
Okay.
And quite a few of them aren't rented out because in recent years they've made better profit than rent just by standing empty. But I mean, there's no real. It's not quite as project driven as the UAE. But there are projects. Another one is Spire London, which will be ready next year, and that's going to have 861 apartments available in, and also places like Chelsea Harbour have always really appealed when they were built to the Arab markets.
Right, but do you see that trend continuing after Brexit again? The more international attraction that London was providing earlier, but with Brexit and some of the clauses in Brexit, that's not what it says.
Right? I don't think Brexit's going to be too much of a problem. I think the legislation that surrounds it is much more important. For example, recently they've put large stamp duty in place. So if you have a property that sells for more than 1.5 million, you have to pay 12% tax on that. And that has definitely put a handbrake on things. A lot of the big companies now are concentrating on mid-market, sort of below 1.5 million, 500 to 1.5, just because the rate of sales above that have really calmed down. And so I think that sort of legislation will really serve as to what's going to happen in the future. Also, how they operate with capital gains and their nom-dom status. That at the moment you can buy relatively cheaply, but I don't think that's going to stay forever.
I was just going to ask you about the 12% excise tax actually. So is that really first going to benefit the economy hugely? And second, isn't this going to sort of dampen the real estate market that they are trying to push?
It's definitely dampened it already. There's absolutely no doubt about it. A lot less of the big houses and big properties have been selling just on the back of that. Because the appeal of selling, 12% is quite a large chunk of anyone's money, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, here you only have to pay 4% of the value for the transfer. So that's an immediate advantage. I mean, the London market is also slower in that if you buy a property in Dubai, you basically go in, swap money and walk out with a new title deed. It can take up to 2 or 3 months in the UK. There's a lot of due diligence and that goes on, and surveys. And I suppose some of those older buildings have got all sorts of sort of damp problems and things, that the survey will find, and then you have to barter around that to make sure that you've got a fair price on the building.
Right, but does that only apply to the new properties and the new investors?
No, that applies across the board.
Across the board, all right.
If you were to buy a cottage in the country, you'd get a survey. It probably gets even worse because they look to see if there are bats in or frogs in your garden, or bats in the roof, or whatever. And these things can stop you developing.
Right. All right. So speaking of finances again, coming back to the UAE, I like how we're going back and forth. I mean, there's just so many comparative points that we can discuss here. But then banks and the loans and schemes by the banks, do you think that is something that we need to work on here? And I'm asking you this from an investor's and from a business owner's point of view.
Well, I don't think there's an agent in the UAE who doesn't wish the amount of cash that you have to have for a mortgage. It could be dropped.
Right.
If that drops, then there'll be an enormous, well, in my view, there would be a quick spike as people who maybe own 2 properties could take some of the capital out and set up another mortgage and buy a 3rd property, and so on.
Right.
So I think if they do drop that, there's been quite a lot of speculation. But they've held firm so far.
So you're talking about the mortgage law essentially, the LTV ratio.
Yeah.
So what would you say would the ideal LTV ratio be?
Well, it's very difficult to say because, of course, that's what triggered the world financial crisis, isn't it? Effectively, was it Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and just basically giving money with no security at all. But you would think even a sort of 5 to 10% drop on existing would have enormous consequences on the market and positive consequences.
Right, but right now we talk about the UAE being a buyer's market, etc. But then from a bank's perspective, there's the whole change in the US monetary policy, and considering Dubai or the dirham is pegged to dollars, interest rates have gone up in the past year. So isn't that again not making it a buyer's market essentially?
Yeah, I mean it definitely contributes to that. But I mean obviously going back to the stock issue, there is plenty of stock and everything has a price. But of course the increased rates, people do feel that. But saying that, we're not going on huge jumps. We're not going back to sort of 80s style interest rates of 10-12%. You know, we're going quarter of 1 point, which fine, you feel it a bit, but it's not so prohibitive. If it was going up 2%, then I think we would have a big handbrake. Right.
So now what would you say is the outlook for the real estate market in the sector, keeping in mind that Expo 2020 is just round the corner and you are expecting a lot of people to come in, and millions in fact to come in?
Well, first of all, you have to say that this year's performance has been pretty good. Just the other day, Arabian Business reported that I think 8,500 transactions had taken place in the last quarter, which was a record. So there's definite signs of action, and I think the amount of money as well involved was right up there near the record anyway.
Right.
Dubai South is an interesting one because it's Expo 2020. There's going to be a huge focus on this. The country's obviously put a lot into their whole operation. It looks amazing. We're starting to see the buildings appear. But Dubai South is there, and it's going to be hugely popular, isn't it? To start with, they've created a new hub there. They're trying to build a legacy, which I think every major event aims to do.
Right.
And some it's harder than others, but the Expo 2020 team, they've got quite a lot of help there with the new Al Maktoum Airport, and there's also a lot of industry around that area already. And by making a hub there, there's definitely room for a future. Also, they're building the metro out there, and when you've got the metro, there's definitely, you can see already there's definite interest, and prices definitely rise around metro stations.
Of course, yes. But then there was another study that was done recently, and it said that I know everyone's counting on Expo 2020 to attract investment and investors in the country, but apparently someone or a potential investor needs to come to a place 7 times before they actually put in money to invest into a property. So Expo is probably going to attract somebody to come once, but the same person, apparently according to the study, has to come back 7 times to put in money.
God, we'll have to hold them here. Take them 7 times. No, I think people do still impulse buy. I mean, you still see the developers selling in malls, don't you? And I don't think you go back 7 times. I mean, you might. I mean, obviously you go shopping quite often, but you might not go back 7 times to see the developer there.
Right.
So people are still buying in that respect. I mean, we've all been on holiday and thought, God, we love it here. Wouldn't it be great to buy? And then we look into it, and then it fades away. So of course you do want to have the idea that you're going to repeat. But with the increased business that's hopefully going to be driven to the UAE, there'll be increased demand. Another thing that's quite interesting is the rise of Airbnb here.
Yeah.
That's definitely, I've got one customer who's looking to sell a villa he's got under construction because he wants to buy an apartment in, I think, Port de la Mer, by Maras, and he feels that the potential return on that is going to be much higher. And I suppose that's all part of what Expo is going to be doing. It's going to be bringing people to the region. The hotel rooms are going to be full, but equally there's going to be an equal opportunity for the Airbnb market.
Right, so you are talking about Airbnb. Is that... Can I equate that to short-term leases here, or is that good?
Well, I think they're special. You need a special license to do that, and then you probably need a bit of management as well to do it. But there are companies now specialising in this.
Right.
And you get your license, and then I suppose it's somewhere between real estate and tourism license. It's got to be because you're the turnover of people.
Right, and finally, what after Expo 2020? The big question, is there going to be a crash? Is it all going to come crumbling down, or will we be able to survive and sustain?
Well, I think to a certain extent, when it first got announced, there was a bit of a momentum, but I think it's now been building quite sensibly since, because it came down, the excitement sort of came down after the initial celebrations.
Right.
And then I think people have realised that it's going to happen, and they're going along slowly, looking at it, and I think everyone's pretty excited to see what's going to happen.
All right, great. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for watching AB Live. We will be back again next week.